Alright, dude, what's up?
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
Pretty good, how you doing?
Good. So, I sent you an email a while back about some debate memes.
Yep,
And
I
I
read it. I
just,
think didn't I
yeah,
respond yesterday, or did I respond before
yeah,
that?
you did.
Yep.
Yeah, you did yesterday. So just for everybody, I'm debated competitively for 4 years and did a little part-time debate this year and a little bit of coaching this year for debate.
Wow!
Yeah, so kind of know a little bit what I'm talking about, maybe. So hopefully I'm not a super cuck. Uh,
Okay.
so I actually watched your video you put out today. the
Yeah?
March, all the March shit and the intellectual dishonesty shit. Um, 1 second, sorry. All right, my dude, sorry about that. Yeah, so I watched your video you put out today about the March memes and shit and uh, the intellectual dishonesty, and I just kind of think that the way um, you handle your conversations kind of tends towards that.
Wait, 10 starts
So
what?
tends towards like opening up the door for a little bit more than is probably necessary. So um, I wanted to sort of give a little bit of like a background of like kind of. So I don't know if you like so you kind of like in the past about like I don't know if you like call your discussions debates. At one point you were like, I don't really think I debate people. I just you were, and then you just recently been calling them debates. So I don't really know what you're
Oh,
saying about that.
I think we moved over to debates because the SEO is way better for search engine shit.
Yeah, I understand that.
I don't like to call them debate because to be fair, they probably are debates, colloquially speaking, but I feel like the term debate usually implies a much more structured format, usually constrained to specific one or two topics or whatever with a panel of judges or whatever. So I don't usually like to refer to them as debates. They're more like discussions. But
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I don't really know what to be honest. Like, I don't know really know what debate means. There's like a lot of different like
layman versions
theories
of it.
about like what that like can boil down to. Some people think like the presidential debates aren't really debates at all. And I think that kind of used to be my position, and now I'm kind of like in between, so I don't really know what all that is. So I just wanted to give a little bit like of a background of sort of how these different types of debate works. If anybody in chat is a debate memer, I did public forum. I saw somebody ask that question. So, and not to just be like like a super like the ethnic nationalism guy, like give the the negroid and the whatever the Caucasoid and like be like super I am very smart type deal, but like kind of look at them as sort of like case studies. Because I'm a kind of a shitter. I play Dota, but I think that debates you can kind of think about them in the way that they're structured and balancing a MOBA is kind of how I've always thought about it. So like the ways that you like structure the rules and stuff like really like tends to the type of thing that is going to be prevalent, obviously, and then like you have to make decisions about like what you find important. So the original kind of like type of debate that like really started out, well, I mean, been going on for ever or whatever, but like competitively they really start with like debates like in like late 1800s and then sort of gained more prevalence in like the early 1900s in this type of debate called policy debate. And basically like what's going on there is like you have like a defined, I guess it's like a defined sentence, and then in policy debate what you do is you come up with a plan to essentially like solve that, right? So a very like good example of a resolution this year's collegiate policy topic was something along the lines of like find a way to curb climate change by substantially cutting fossil fuels emissions or something. So like lots of plans are obvious things like we implement a carbon tax, we do cap and trade, we do all those things. That's like pretty good for a while. It started off pretty lay, which like I don't know if you know what that means, but in the debate community that means like it's about speaking style. It's about like it's not really about like giving out a whole bunch of evidence or anything like that. It's just sort of about like you sort of like you're like super think of like probably what Crossfire is going for on NBC, like go for those gotcha moment type deals, mainly like a back and forth type thing. And then as time goes on, it gets more and more like progressive. So what that means is that you tend more towards evidence because like obviously debates are all subjective. There can be no objective winner.
Without
But the most
judges, sure.
objective way, the most objective way you can have a round of debate is to compare, the impacts of each other's claims to each other with the evidence that's kind of standing at the end, and then compare that to each other. So as time goes on, the rules get more and more fine-tuned and stuff. So they have like a speaking order. So there'll be one team that they'll speak first, and then the other team speaks second. Then the first team goes again, and the second team. Then the first team goes twice in a row, and then the second team. So it's the first team gets like this time skew in the middle to try to like alleviate some of those like problems that you see with like second speakers have huge advantages and stuff. And this creates all these problems of people who they feel like some sides in a debate will inherently always have a disadvantage, or they feel that maybe like the resolution in itself is unfair. So you start having these things called off-case arguments. And essentially what that means is that like it's sort of like the meta debate, like not like, and this sort of in like some of your like, this is sort of like kind of, I like to think like where your discussions with Sargon like kind of start to go a little bit when you talk about intellectual dishonesty, right? Like what should we be debating about? Like what should this debate be about, like in itself, you know what I'm saying? So like not just like we're debating the merits of immigration or whatever, but like we're debating about whether like the side that I'm forced to take is, and that's a little bit different for you obviously because you got.
Wait, because you what? Your mic keeps cutting out a little bit. You might want to turn down the threshold.
Sorry, I had it away from my face. So what did you hear? What did you not hear?
You said the discussions with Sargon can kind of go away, and then you'd.
Yeah, so the discussions with Sargon kind of like get into this area a little bit about like what each side like kind of is like with the fairness and the intellectual honesty of that, and that's kind of like what these like quote unquote off case arguments sort of became, which is like probably a good thing to be talking about these things. But the problem is it gets really, really shit really, really fast once you start being able to have these arguments in a debate that aren't about what you're supposed to be debating about, right? So this around the time of like 2006-ish got like really shit, like really, really shit. Like I could give you stories about how like I would lose debates about climate change because somebody would say that, bring up like a Afro pessimism argument that like anything you do that is not for the betterment of minorities in a community is like the Earth is going to end one day anyway. So everything we should do should be to help minorities, and therefore any climate change policy is racist. And that obviously becomes like a shit show pretty fast to be able to like be allowed to run these arguments. So what they did was they created this new type of debate called public forum, which is what I debated in for a while, which started off kind of exactly like it sounds. It's supposed to be like a completely layman could come in and you could debate for them, and it could be like all these memes. You wouldn't have to be able to like explain. You wouldn't be running these super in-depth, complicated critiques on like the arguments, whatever. But the problem is then that allows you back open to like the subjectivity of debate, which doesn't reward the right things, right? You want evidence to be high. You want like speaking on your feet, probably like logic or thinking on your feet to be like a high valued thing in meme and all that. But at the same time, you don't want people to just come in and, naked ape you and shut up, straw man. So it's got to have some sort of objectivity without, taking away, I don't know, like that part of it. So like relating this back a little bit, I think that, so for public forum and policy, these two kind of, and now public forum also is like, it's becoming more and more progressive like policy did. It's against the rules technically to like run these off-case type things, but it's becoming very, very evidence heavy, which is probably a good thing, right? It's almost like, so when you're constructing your case, another way I like to think about it like a MOBA in a way is that, like, for example, like choosing, like, there's lots of like jargon that comes up in like competitive debate and stuff, but like choosing what you would run, choosing like the blocks, which is like what you would read in a rebuttal, to read, choosing your turns and all that is like really, really strategic, kind of like picking heroes or champions. So I think that both of these kinds of debates have flaws to them for sure, and there's no really correct way to solve any of these problems because there's like really deep like epistemological like problems with a lot of debate. So like I said with like this like MOBA analogy, so like
okay, wait, hold on. Wait, so what exactly
are we talking about? Stop me at any point.
Yeah, wait, so what exactly are we talking about?
So like structuring a debate. Like how should like the perfect debate be structured?
So you're
like,
trying to give me an idea of how better to structure my conversations with people.
And I don't have like...
Oh, fuck, I just left the room. Who the fuck are you guys? Shut the fuck up.
We were watching...
Oh my god, I'm sorry, I just clicked out of the room on accident. I'm fucking retarded. Okay, I didn't hear anything that you just said. Sorry, go on.
Okay, so like I don't have like one like perfect... meme for you to like fix all your debates, but I will tell you some things that I think would be good. So in this like analogy of like structuring a MOBA, right? Like
Well, here
So
I
the
think
structure of the
here I can understand. I think the initial premise well enough that I don't
Yeah.
need an analogy. So we can just talk
Yeah,
about structuring debates.
sure.
Okay.
Okay. So like for example, in competitive debate, there's like times, right, when you're supposed to speak, right?
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
first person will go up and they have a 4 or an 8 minute period, and that's like the only time when they get to lay out new arguments.
Okay.
They're not allowed to like come and bring up a new argument in the last 10 seconds of the debate that you can't respond to, because at the end of the day, if you don't respond to something, it's considered conceded in the eyes of the judge.
So you're saying that I should have time limits on my?
I think that that is a really important thing. Would be what I would say. At least a time limit. I don't think maybe you should have like I speak for 8 minutes, you speak for 8 minutes, we come together, we discuss for 4 minutes, then I speak for 8 minutes again, and you speak for 8 minutes again type deal. But I think a time limit would definitely help you, for a few reasons. There's like some really deep, and I could get into some really deep like epistemological type memes about like having to agree to like a truth that you can like base impacts on and stuff, and then that only matters if there's a time limit at the end of the day, because debaters would have to agree on something. But really a time limit is important because, and you've talked about this before, I know, with, I think it was, you were talking about it in response to the reactionary Catholic guy, how you'll like start on one thing and then you'll like go on to another thing, and then you'll go on to another thing, and then you'll go on to another thing that are like kind of like sub arguments that he's trying to use to warrant the initial thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And then like you never really get back to where you're going, and then at the end of the day, suddenly conversation that started with whether or not we should have an ethno state, and now suddenly he's like trying to like pigeonhole you into defending why rape is bad. You know what I'm saying? Like I think a time limit would really help these things, because at the end of the day, if you can say, okay, we're done now, like then that forces him to get back to the original point. It forces people to get back to the original point. And just for talking to each other for 2 hours, it sort of opens up this realm where he can like make an argument, and then in debate this is called shelling the argument. You can just sort of say, yeah, I've sort of moved on to other things. I don't really advocate for that anymore. Even though like he totally used it to warrant onto something else through like completely, fabricated evidence. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
I
think so. Basically,
you sounded
so basically, what you're saying is that it's just good to stay focused on one central argument and not to drift, right? It was essentially
and I know that's something you try to do more.
Yeah,
but I
it's
think
something
that
I've been trying
a
to.
time limit would be really good, for that.
Maybe. I mean, I don't. I guess I'm not too sure I understand the purpose of the time limit. Like, as long as they stay on one topic, why not let them say their spiel or whatever? And then, like, I don't think in any of my conversations has anybody actually solo talked, except for maybe Thorne, for more than like 4 minutes at a time. That's a long time to talk.
I mean, it's not really about just, I guess it's not really just about somebody like rambling on by themselves for a really long time, but it's about like, so in the regular debate, it's called crossfire, is when you're just going, it's really what your entire debate format is. It's just two people asking each other questions, going back and forth. There's no like, you guys obviously don't give like speeches or anything where you're uninterrupted. And in the competitive debate community, that is like considered the shittiest part of the debate, the part with like the least substance, because of the fact that that people don't really have to commit to much. And I understand that you're not going to go into this thing where like it's like, all right, reactionary Catholic, you're going to talk for 4 minutes about why we should have an ethno state. Then I will. Then you can make responses to what I've said. Then I'll make responses to what you've said. Then maybe we can come together in the middle. Like obviously that's not good for anything, right? But I think that a time limit does help to sort of alleviate some of those pressures, for sure.
All right, I'll consider. I guess I don't know. I just
like. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, do you see why that seems important to me?
Okay, so
like,
give me a sample.
Important.
Can you give me like a sample debate where you think a time limit would have helped? Like, I don't understand.
I think definitely in the second reactionary Catholic thing would have definitely helped a lot. I think there was one point. I don't remember what debate it was, but it was essentially like, all right, buddy, you go away for 30 minutes. I'll go away for 30 minutes. We'll write up our thing. Do you remember? You might remember this happening in one of the debates. And then we'll come back together. You like find all the evidence that you say you're talking about. I find all the evidence I say I'm talking about.
Oh, this was the argument for this was the argument about the guy that got fired in the school or whatever.
Oh yeah. This was, and that's obviously not like super political memery, but like, you can also sort of see why that would be helpful there, right?
Well, like so in that thing,
in.
well, no, that so this wasn't actually a problem with the format. This wasn't a problem with the debate format. It was a misunderstanding of how you're supposed to reference source material to make an argument, which is a problem that a lot of people have. I don't think the setup.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a problem that a lot of people have because they don't understand it, or if it's like have because they're just
I think it's because people
dishonest?
don't. No, I think it's because people don't understand it. Did you ever take any
that's
high
probably
level?
fair.
Do you go to college for English or anything, or take high level
Yeah,
English classes in school? Right.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
aware that when you're making an argument using source material, you have to utilize a certain number of quotes in your material, right? You have to draw from the
Yeah,
material,
of course,
because
100%.
otherwise your argument is baseless conjecture. Right? I think a lot of people don't understand that. When and that was kind of what the argument centered on. Was I was making arguments and I could source all of my claims from multiple statements made in the video, and he was kind of hypothesizing a ton of shit that he couldn't reference, and that was what it was about. I don't think a different debate structure would have helped that.
I think the thing I'm thinking of though is that if there is a time limit on these things, then people will come in probably. And I mean, I understand that you're sometimes just grabbing random ass people off Reddit or Twitter or whatever, but like I think that will help people understand that like, all right, what I'm bringing to the table is what I bring to the table. And that sort of brings me on to one of my next kind of things I think you should do is you should tell people like in the beginning, I want you to link me up front any evidence that you have. This happens a lot in the competitive debate community. That judges will say, I want to see every single piece of evidence that you guys are going to cite in your case.
Sure, yeah, it's kind of like in a court or whatever, right? You can't bring up random evidence that has to be submitted
of
for
course.
Yeah, and
sure.
I could do this. Typically, my debates aren't structured that way. I don't invite people on with.
And I mean, it's kind
like,
of hard as well because sometimes things come up that you didn't know were going to come up, right? And you're just reading stuff in response to stuff that you've said or they've said, so you don't know that you're going to say it, and they can't be expected to cover all your bases, which is a theory argument in progressive debate by itself. But I think that like at least for their like main thesis of whatever, if it's a person that you're not just like grabbing off Twitter with like, you know, the edgy, hey, you want to hop on and talk about it memes, like if it's a guy like, I don't know, Sargon, be like, yo, Sargon, I want all your evidence up front. So I have that also gives you a chance to look at it before, and then obviously hold yourself to the same and link him everything that you have. Because like the problem is when you're sitting where everyone is debating here, sitting at a computer, right? Like you can just look up, you can Google anything during a debate and it'll fit what you want, right? But these ideas that we have about why we're coming to defend them, right? So like Sargon's ideas of why marriage somehow increases wealth or some shit, like he has that idea before coming to the debate, right? Like he can look up some like bullshit evidence during the debate to find that, but his ideas that he's had are long standing. So he should be able to, you know, warrant that before the debate even starts. And if somebody can't warrant it in a debate, then that should be enough grounds to be able to say, you know, sorry, buddy, like this argument doesn't really hold up.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure.
So you think that would like be a good like thing?
I mean, for more formal things over specific ideas, yeah, maybe requesting some evidence up front. Yeah. The only other thing I can really think of with these memes are speaking orders, which is in speaking orders
debates. Yeah, so speaking orders and really like specifically times that you're supposed to bring up things. So obviously in a more structured debate, you have a time to make the arguments, to respond, sort of narrow down to what you're going to, what they say, go for in the end. And then like your last speech or whatever, just like you'll, and also it's like, it's not really frowned upon to concede to things in competitive debate. People just concede 3 or 4 like main points in their case all the time because you just don't have the time to go for them, which is also a good thing because it makes you debating on the points that you're doing the best on, right? But if you have a speaking order where there's specific times when you can lay out evidence, when there's specific times that you can respond to that evidence and bring up new things and, you know, only have time to rehash out what's happened so far and, you know, weigh the impacts.
I don't necessarily disagree with this, but like the kind of conversations I have are a little bit different, right? You know, you can't concede a single point ever. Like you have to be lightning careful with everything.
I think that's bad.
It is, but it's the nature of.
I know it's the way it kind of is.
Yeah.
But I think that having a like sort of saying like, all right, for 15 minutes we're gonna or like, you know, I'm gonna lay out my points, you lay your points, whatever. Then for 15 minutes we can go back and forth and just sort of talk about those points. Maybe then in the next 15 minutes we'll, you know, try to come to more of a consensus. I understand that it's harder because the discussions you have aren't really prone to this, but I think if you had sort of more of like a formal timed, here we're going to debate for an hour, we're going to debate for 2 hours, we're going to debate for 30 minutes maybe about this topic, 30 minutes about that topic, or whatever, you know. I think it would, because I think a lot of where the intellectual dishonesty comes from with like, people taking those like one-off clips is because we have an hour-long conversation that has started in one place that nobody knows where it's going when it starts.
Oh,
right?
no, I disagree with that. I don't think that. I think that when you're talking about things like when I'm talking about things like intellectual dishonesty, maybe this isn't right of me. If you've got a more formal background, maybe I use these words a little bit differently. But when I'm talking about intellectual dishonesty, I'm always talking about that with malintent, like done for malicious purposes. Not intellectual dishonesty because they, it's so long that, they can only grab one or two things. But like they know that this one particular thing sounds bad and that's why they grab it. But they have no interest in the greater format.
This is a great idea.
So like I think that all I'm trying to say is I think that these same problems would exist even with your format. People would still try to find like the one-liners and clip them and then throw them.
I would agree to you to an extent that people who are intellectually dishonest, for example, with all the DMCA stuff with Sargon, was done to make you look bad. It was done without respect for, intellectual honesty or anything like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I also would say that nobody in these things like has the mindset going out, ooh, I'm really going to, screw over somebody today by misquoting them and then everybody's going to think I'm super smart type deal. I think what he's doing, like in the moment for him, he's like finding something, like it's really easy to like justify things that you mean that you don't explain very well in the most negative light for him, for somebody from like his perspective or something.
Yeah,
right?
there's there's actually a very specific name for what you just said. You're the debate master. You should know what it's called. What is it? Basically, the idea is that if one person, if you hit your child, there's a 50 million reasons for it, and you know exactly why you did it, and you can justify it. But if you see someone else do it, you give them absolutely no leeway, and you automatically assume the worst thing possible for why they would do it.
There is a word for it,
yeah,
but I
there's
don't know
a specific
what
name for
the word
it.
is.
Someone in chat will say it, but yeah.
But like, I honestly don't believe that any of these people going out and doing these things that like when they take 10-second clip from a debate or something, like they're doing it to like be a dick. They're doing it to like, I don't know.
I think they do it to win the
argument. I mean, I
argument.
bet they probably do it to like fuck you over, but they don't do it going out, waking up in the morning like,
yeah, it might be called attribution bias.
If I can just lie to the internet.
I mean, like, so I hope that that's the majority of what happens. Are you familiar with programs like Rush Limbaugh?
Yeah, of course.
So, like, the problem is that there's either two worlds that exist. Either one, people are doing this intentionally because they want to lie to create a narrative, or two, they're actually so lost in their own world that they're incapable of understanding the points of views of other people.
Yeah.
I would hope that it would be more.
Yeah,
I would hope that it would be more they're doing it maliciously rather than they're really lost in their world. So, like, for instance, when people quote SJWs, like, I think that somebody like Richard Lewis might actually be lost to reality, where he genuinely does believe what you're saying. He really does think that SJWs are trying to destroy companies and be insane and destroy the whole world.
I agree that he believes that. I agree 100% that he believes that.
But I think that there are other people that maybe know that they're being a little... Like Sargon. I don't think that Sargon is that far gone. I think Sargon knows that most of the times when he's quoting SJWs, he's probably just picking a crazy one-off on Twitter.
Probably he knows that. Right. But I think when he does that, he's not thinking, when he, like, goes for the lowest hanging fruit, oh, this is a really bad thing. I don't think he sees the full picture.
Oh, yeah. It's mostly probably done from an area of ignorance, right? Because people don't understand things like selection bias, or people don't understand that that maybe what they're choosing is not, kind of a representative way of looking at things, but they're really just picking like one-off insane examples. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Probably a little bit of both worlds there.
Yeah, probably, sure.
But regardless, I do think that when you have, regardless from whether people are doing it intentionally or not, I think that having a debate format that starts, so it's, hey, what do you want to talk about first? We can just sort of move through everything. I think a really good example of this was like even before the election when you debated that girl on poll who like had the DUI and then she said like the cop fucked her over or whatever.
Yeah.
And like that kind of just goes everywhere.
So
right?
one of the big problems that I have to deal with that you don't have to deal with in your format is like when you're dealing with in a professional debate format with whatever it is you deal with, like everybody that you're talking to, like you have like at least a baseline of intelligence.
And that's like another problem is that there's a judge.
Yeah,
right?
And I have no baseline with the people that I'm like. Imagine you're trying to run your debate format in some like national level, and some of the people that you bring on are just straight out like machine gunning fallacies at you. Like, what do you do as a debater there? Like, are you going to sit out and say like, well, actually, I believe that this, and then at the end of the day, the judge isn't like, some rational fucking judge that's paid to sit there and hire and critically evaluate things. It's like subreddits full of like, savages.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's definitely, that's definitely a problem you have to deal with.
Yeah.
For sure.
Like what you said earlier is something that I actually very, very strongly believe. The presidential debates, they're not debates, they're just advertising platforms, right?
Oh,
in a debate,
100%.
right? In these quote unquote debates,
one after another.
Yeah, exactly. They ask a question, and then you're given to proselytize or whatever, to sit there and evangelize your platform after every single question, and then they do that back and forth, and they never really respond to one another. They never bring up facts. It's a really embarrassing format, in my opinion. I don't consider it any form of legitimate debate at all.
No, absolutely not. I mean, there's some. I can't remember who it was now. I feel like it was a Republican, maybe like John Kasich or Marco Rubio, who like actually tried to get into it a little bit. And like do some of those memes of like actually trying to get people to respond to stuff.
Maybe every now and then they'll kind of like
rarely happens for sure.
Because nobody holds anybody accountable. And to some extent, this is where I actually, I don't want to disagree with you because I know it's so different. This is where I think the format actually hurts the time limits in the formats. Because there were times where I didn't want it to be limited to 2 minutes, and I didn't want it to be a single back and forth. I wanted them to go back and forth for 20 minutes on something. Like, I don't want the debate moderator to just cut them off and go like, oh, well, okay, well, now we're moving on to the next question. Like, well, no, this has to be resolved. These two people just said very different things. Why are you moving on to a totally different topic now,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we all want, is that for the end of the day, like the two people who are debating come together and maybe not say you're right or I'm right, but say here's where we have common ground, here's where we don't. But I will tell you, in 99% of every debate I've ever been in, and I've debated hundreds of times, that will never, ever, ever happen.
Where people come together and find common ground?
Where there will ever be an end, really, to that.
Oh, sure.
Back and forth. I mean, your back and forth normally end when you essentially get like pissed off or triggered or something, and you realize that there's no reaching them anymore, right? With that one Sargon fan who like didn't understand correlation and causation, right? Like eventually you just got to hang up, right? Like it's wasting everybody's time at that point.
Well, so kind of the point that I kind of go for, that I've said a few times, is that I'm never really aiming to change the mind of the person I'm talking to, because most of them are incapable of changing their opinions, and I'm obviously not pointing to the more extreme people. I'm trying to grab the people in the middle that are listening and are kind of on the fence about some things. It's kind of like what I'm going for.
Yeah, and I totally agree that's what you should be going for. But the thing is, if that's the case, then going back and forth forever just doesn't really get you anywhere. No, because eventually you just start going in circles, right? Like,
well, but I don't necessarily agree with that. So, for instance, with that race realist guy that I talked to, that debate, the first one that we had, I left that, pretty genuinely bamboozled, or rather, I had stuff that I had to read that I couldn't refute. But the second debate, where I went back and I did look up every single study, I think that after the first one, I think that he came off looking like he probably knew more about the topic than me. But in the second one, I think he made himself look like a complete and total idiot, right? After I was able to wave off the few bad studies that he gave me, because I'd actually went in and read into them, he started to get very, very, very extreme. So I feel like in those cases, I think that it ended up working out pretty well. I don't know, maybe you'd have to pull the audience to find out that, but like, I don't know. I think with a certain level of...
I will admit that you did go back and took out there's a word for what I'm thinking of. You took out a lot of his studies that he was talking about.
Sure.
Stuff. I think that's good to like go back. I 100% thinking redebating people is 100% worthy of people's time.
Yeah, especially if there are disagreements over empirical data, which is like really important right now.
Yeah. Like I always say that, like people always say that, like the most objective debate you could ever have is like if there's a computer and you both put in all of your evidence that you could use against each other, and then the computer just ciphers through all the evidence, figures out what actually responds to what, and then just pops out a winner, right? But a lot of the problem with like kind of thinking like that is what I was talking about earlier with like, what do you want to reward when you have a debate, right? Do you want to reward a fast speaking style? Do you want to reward quick on your feet thinking? Do you want to reward somebody who's done a lot of research? Do you want to reward somebody who is really good with like leading questions and that type of thing? Do you want to reward somebody who's really good with like line by line debating, with like keeping track of all the evidence? Like there's lots of different things that you have to think about.
Sure, yeah, and I can kind of understand that. Yeah.
And I think when you like just have these conversations that they just go on forever, it just starts to benefit people who can like essentially baffle you in like a second and make you say something that you like haven't really thought out. Like,
oh, sure.
For example, the classic examples with like John Tron like saying, "Why are like communists defending you?" And then like you were like, what's wrong with communism.
Sure.
Obviously,
So basically,
not meaning like
yeah. So basically, your thing is that if you're not like super ultra well defined, what happens is you'll go on and on and on, and since the opponent will never ever 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 abdicate their position ever because they would kill themselves before doing so, inevitably, right? But the probability approaching infinity, I will eventually come across them saying something that I don't understand, and then when we have to stop it there, it looks like they've won, even though they've spent an hour or two being refuted at every single point, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even with the debate with reactionary Catholic, and you took out a bunch of his studies, he can still go on to like
bring up random shit and
bring up random shit like you were just talking about, and be like totally destroyed SJW in a debate, and then I didn't actually read his post, but I'm assuming he cited like 1 or 2 lines where like out of context you might have sounded a little bit autistic, and then everybody there just circle jerks about it for like ever. But I think like having a defined start and an end kind of takes that out, right? Like once you're nearing the end, you know this is the time when I've got to, focus my ideas, really go for something. Like, you know what I'm saying? And obviously you're not going to eliminate the problem overnight, and you're probably not going to eliminate a lot of the problems in general of people who will never, ever, ever, ever give up any ground on any point ever. And they would, like the one guy who said that he would defend Trump if Trump tweeted that all N-words should die, right? Like, people who just don't think, right, about like their own claims, and they'll just defend them to the end of the earth without even considering whether they're wrong.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those are some of my recommendations. I would say a time limit, or at least, a rough time limit, saying like, let's talk for an hour. I'm going to give my points, you give yours. Maybe we can like stop in the middle for a little intermission, get some like hot chocolate at Starbucks or something, and come back together. I think a little more structure will tend to make things just a little bit more objective, tends to feed out the intellectual dishonesty, because it's just hard to watch like stuff like the Sargon clips and stuff like that. Just like, and when obviously like it just seems like at sometimes like there's nothing you can do about it. So those are my thoughts as somebody who's done this for a while.
Sure. Okay, well, I appreciate that last point. It was really good, exactly. Cool.
All right, cool. Thanks, buddy.
All right, I love you.
Stay
Have
safe.
fun.
Have fun.